tree, and that's where the beds were, and they had a canvas that they put up for.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. I've got that, like I said, I had one blown up
Yeah.
a little bit more.
Yeah, those pictures are neat.
Yeah, I got some of those pictures, like some of them that I had redone and made bigger. You couldn't hardly see them in the small pictures, but Ben, you could really see them good when they were.
Well, it's amazing the picture quality.
Yeah,
All those pictures, and they're still, I
Yeah.
mean, you look at them, and they're still in great shape now.
oh, yeah. And I had several of them redone. I think they're in the bedroom by the head of my bed. But there's one of Uncle Henry, K.B. Nelson, Corwin Butterworth, Mr. Butterworth, and Pete Nelson. Because right to the west of camp, the property that the guys own now that has the machine guns up there shooting
Yeah.
from, that was called Pete Nelson Canyon. Because Pete Nelson lived there. And I got a picture of them in front of this old barn, and there's Pete Nelson was one of them. And they were holding, I think Mr. Butterworth was holding, looked like a weasel. I'm not quite sure what they were. But that's the only picture of Pete Nelson. And I don't remember, and then there was, the next canyon over was the Goldtree. And I can't remember if it was Goldtree or Pete Nelson, who Grandpa, when they went hunting, they went there early one morning, by there, walking up through there, and the guy, he was an old bachelor, invited him in for breakfast. Well, he had a plate, and the only clean part on the plate is where he put the food. It was just, they declined eating breakfast with him. But yeah, I can't remember if it was the Goldtree or Pete Nelson, which one of the two that, it might have been Pete Nelson. I got a picture of him, but yeah. And I found an old stone foundation up one canyon way up there. I took Violet up there one time to look for bottles, but
Uh-huh.
way up this back canyon back up there where maybe I found it one time when I was deer hunting up there.
Was it above Uncle Henry's? Or?
It's way off to the west.
Oh,
You'd have to either go up and go through the forest or go through some private property and go up the canyon to it. It was up the Goldtree Canyon at the head of it. Now there's houses around, so.
uh-huh.
But those guys were nice enough when I put the dozer down in the canyon and we were taking the dozer up to take it out,
Uh-huh.
to where they let me come up to their property, and we, with the low boy, and unloaded the dozer and to go into ours to get it.
Oh,
We
that's
couldn't
cool.
come from ours.
Yeah.
Well, we could, but it was so steep.
Now, that mine that was back up there, what was it called?
Black Widow Mine,
Black Widow Mine.
that's way back off to the east.
Yeah.
That was when they were prospecting for uranium.
Which one was the gold mine?
Oh, the Queen Bee.
The Queen, up above.
The Queen Bee is way back over there. They've got a door. It's still a mine, but they put a locked door so you can't get in there.
Is it on the National Forest?
I believe so. I'm sure it must be National Forest.
Yeah. Oh, cool.
Yeah, the Queen Bee. There were several mines, like the Red Hawk. I think it's a Red Hawk mine. Was just where La Panza Road hits Highway 58.
Uh-huh.
Off to the left over there was a mine. We used to deer hunt back up through there, and there was still some remains of the mines.
Cool.
And down that canyon, just before you get to Highway 58 on La Panza, that big canyon that goes way down there for miles, there's several houses down there now, but a guy named Mr. Pond lived there, and he had bees, and he got honey. And Grandpa and them years ago used to buy honey in a 5-gallon bucket, tin can get the honey from him. And down that canyon's where Clarence Nielsen was hunting, and he found that old pistol, the 1860, I think 1861 Navy pistol that I have in this.
Mhm.
Found it when he was deer hunting out in the hills.
Okay, that's cool.
Yeah, that would have been something. You wonder about the story about the pistol.
Yeah, who left it there?
But
And
I've got to take those things out in front so I can see what's inside that
yeah.
trophy case. There's some neat stuff in there.
Oh yeah.
I
Now-
thought about doing that, but then I go, well, where do I put this stuff?
Well, you have your two daughters get rid of their boxes up there. Then you could put it on the
Well, yeah.
yeah. But now,
See, she's real good because she always asks more questions, try to get more information. Yes. And the neat part is when she's trying to find out information without letting on, you're sitting there knowing what she's doing, but it's really good. Go ahead, Linda. What? Love you.
you do.
Yeah, I'd like you to say the gold cougarans belong to Buck.
Oh, they don't? I assumed they did.
Now I do have one $5 gold piece in the safe.
And that's Bucks.
And Alice gave it to me. Wasn't that nice of her?
Yeah.
She gave me a $5 gold piece.
Yeah.
And a silver dollar, a Morgan dollar. And then the other one was we looked it up, a French.
Oh yeah.
It's a French coin. 1775.
Really?
Yeah. And I took it to a coin store in San Luis just to find out. And he said what it was, and he says it's worth probably about $30. And I think we looked it up, and that's about what it was worth.
You'd think, gee, a coin 240 years old would be worth more than that.
You'd think it'd be worth hundreds and hundreds of dollars.
Yeah.
Old coins aren't worth any unless they're
But
a
there's-
certain coin.
They're sure cool to look at.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But-
Now, kind of off topic, but when when Grandpa got kicked in the head by the horse,
He didn't get kicked in the head by the horse.
what happened?
He
Fell
got
off the
bucked
horse.
off.
Oh, bucked off. Sorry.
He got this horse from Bill Ernst's father-in-law, and we were right down there on the stuff Aunt Carol sold. We were right on the road, and my dad had the saddle on the horse, and he climbed on the horse, but one of the stirrups where you put your foot in was flipped upside down. So he was in the saddle, and he leaned over to flip it over, and the horse bucked him off, and he lit on his head. And what it was a real slow seepage of some vessel or something. It was real slow, and it took, I would say, a couple months, but I don't know how long it was before it got to the point to where, I remember the last day was one morning, Carol and I were getting ready to go to school, and it snowed that day. And I went in and I told my dad, he was still in bed, and this was unusual because he never was in bed. He was always up, but he was in bed, and I told him that it snowed. And when we came back from school, there was a note on the table, and it said that Carol and I were supposed to go over to Grandma and Otto's. So that's when they told us that he was up in San Francisco, because they took him to the doctor, and the doctor says they didn't have facilities here.
Yeah.
And my mom said Clarence Nielsen drove. She said she always hated Clarence Nielsen's driving because he drove fast. She said, I was so thankful because they zipped. And the doctor said if they'd have waited another day, he'd have been dead.
Wow.
So, and they had the choice of putting those holes in or putting a steel plate in, and my dad wouldn't go for the steel plate. So
Yeah.
that's what those holes were for, where they relieved and did the stuff. But he was up there, I don't know how long he was up there, maybe a month?
Wow.
I don't, he may have been there 2 weeks, but I don't remember.
So Grandma stayed up there the whole time?
Yeah, yeah. And I got to stay, listen to The Shadow at Grandma's house. And it was the program was The Red Room. And I went up to go to bed that night and the room was red. Oh, gosh. That was a neat house. The 2-story, and you go up the stairway and there had been 3 bedrooms, and there was a bathroom up there. It was neat. And it had to been 3 bedrooms, because downstairs was just the back porch that had a bathroom, and the kitchen, and the hallway with the dining room, and the living room. So yeah, all 3 of the bedrooms were upstairs. And they were old, and they had to go up those stairs. They were steep stairs.
And that's the house that was just right next door to Grandma and Grandpa's.
Yeah, it's still
Yeah,
there, but
yeah.
they added, when they sold it, the people added on to it, onto
Yeah.
the one side. Good.
Now, when you were growing up, Great Grandpa and Great Grandma Klintworth, were they still down? They
were
had
dead.
moved in the 40s, didn't they?
Back to Orange.
Yeah. Did they move in the 40s?
They moved back in probably the 20s,
Oh, in the 20s.
because they lived down there for years before
Oh.
they passed away. Yeah.
And they took Minnie with them, right? Because isn't she buried down in
Minnie's
Orange
buried
County?
down there. Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure that Minnie went down when they went down. See, because Aunt Mary and Aunt Emma, well, Aunt Sophie was down there already, but then they married, and they were down there. I think Aunt Sophie was working in the packing plant for the Irvine company. She worked there for years and years. And I don't know how Aunt Mary met Herman or Aunt Emma met Fred, or how Aunt Sophie met Al. I don't know how they met.
But Hank Pondorf was
Aunt Sophie's brother.
Aunt Sophie's brother. Yeah.
See, there were three kids. There was Aunt Sophie and Hank, and then they had a sister who was Pearl, you know Pearl?
Yeah, Pearl.
Her mother. Her
Oh.
mother was a sister. So actually, Aunt Sophie never had any, she had a child that died at birth. But there were no descendants from her. There were no descendants for Hank. So Pearl was a lone child of the other sister, and so she inherited everything from all 3
Oh.
of them. And then one of her daughters ended up with the house down there, that Aunt Sophie's house.
Now Aunt Sophie and Hank Pondorf used to live up here, right?
No, they never lived up here.
Oh, they were always down south.
Yeah. So, yeah, see, Aunt Sophie she was a Myers. She was a cousin of Grandpa's.
A Myers.
Well, no, she
Wait.
wasn't. She was a Pondorf.
I'm like-
she could have been a Myers.
I'm like, wait a second.
Hey, Pondorf. So I don't know how they were related, but she was a cousin to. So probably her mother must had to have been a Myers.
So her mother was
Bill
great
Sabine.
grandma Klintworth's sister.
Probably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, that makes
Because I'm
sense.
going, wait a minute, she couldn't have been Myers. No. Yeah. So it was funny because at Aunt Sophie's house. Her husband, I guess, was in World War One. Matter of fact, he gave me that World War One bayonet that's out there.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Oh, in the case?
in the case. And next to their fireplace, on not the hearth, but what do you call this thing here?
The,
Anyway,
yeah,
sitting on the, well, what?
mantle? No, that's
Okay,
the
mantle.
mantle. That's
Hearth.
the hearth.
Okay.
Yeah.
They had this big World War One shell, artillery shell, that stood this high,
Oh, that's cool.
right next to the fire. When Pearl's daughter sold the place, somehow or another, about that artillery shell, the bomb squad came. It was loaded. All that time next to the fire, this was an unexploded shell sitting there. And I remember kids, yeah, we'd play with it. It was this tall, it was sitting right there, you know. Oh, shoot.
Unexploded artillery shells,
Yeah.
dynamite. Hey.
But Uncle Al, he was different. When we were little kids, we was kind of afraid of him because he was going to. It was just his personality, grumpy, and he always had his pipe. He and Hank both smoked pipes all the time. Always had a pipe hanging with him. Uncle Al never got real close to him because we was kind of afraid of him. But it was just, he got a big kick out of scaring kids.
Oh, man.
You got anything you want for him? He's just sitting there thinking of things for his next book. But, oh yeah.
See, no, I love the story too of Uncle Henry stringing you up in the burlap bag.
Oh yeah, that wasn't fun. Hanging me up in a pine tree in a sack. That one. But we got back at Arnie and I were coming back from up at the upper pond, Uncle Henry's pond, because there was a trail up there. We had the road, but we hadn't repaired the road. It was pretty overgrown, so we always took the trail. So we heard somebody coming, so we got down in the bushes. I got to get my story straight. Wrong. Where Marnie and I are walking down the trail, and something was making this noise right off the trail. So I said, "Get our knives out." We thought it was Uncle Henry. He'd gone off the trail and was making noises. And so, but then he said who he was because we were getting our knives out. Now, I got to get my story straight because I started my story without remembering how it went. But oh yeah. Yeah, getting hung up in the tree in a sack, that wasn't fun.
How old were you?
18?
No.
I don't know, probably 6 or 7 or 8.
Small enough to fit in the
I
burlap
could fit
sack.
inside of a burlap sack.
He was 27. It was his bachelor party.
But no, I had a lot of fun. Boy, the Klintworth family we'd camp up there for like 5 days for the first of deer season.
Uh-huh.
I mean, we had
And it'd be the whole group.
everybody, yeah.
Yeah.
All the cousins and Uncle Henry and the whole group. And the guys would hunt. That was when we were still too young to even go out walking to beat the brush. Oh yeah. And I can always remember there was this old, and I've got a picture of the fence for some reason. And the Bethel brothers, they would come all the miles where they lived, come all the way down. And see, they leased the forest, but they acted like they owned everything, and they came down one time, and my mom and Aunt Zena were there. And I don't know where we kids were, but it was when everybody else was. They came down, and they accused the Klintworths of knocking the fence down or cutting the fence because they had cattle up there. And my mom said, the Klintworths would not do that. They're cattlemen and everything. And finally the Bethel boys left, and Aunt Zena says, Bill would. Oh, shoot. With the Bethel brothers. That was so funny.
Grandpa never would.
Uncle
Would've done
Henry and
that.
I were coming down the road hunting one day, and here the Bethels came in their Jeep. And you never knew with the Bethel brothers whether they were going to be your friends or what. Because they had a sign up there, way up there, and I wished I'd have got that sign. It says, Sam Rhodes and Bill Murray, keep out and keep your stock out too. So this day they came down their Jeep. So Uncle Henry and I, Uncle Henry, of course, he's easy going, and I'm just sitting there going, oh boy, I don't know. So they were friendly to us, but the longer they talked, what they were going to do to Bill Murray and Sam Rhodes, they were going to hang them the next time they came up, or it ended up they were just going to shoot them. But boy, if they saw those, they were going to shoot them. And it was, I'm glad I got to know them, in a way. But it was so funny because there was Fred and Jim Bethel. Jim was the boss. Fred was the follower. And they would go into town whenever they were briefed out there. All they had were the trails to walk and stuff. So when I'm sure you've heard all of this before. When they went to town, they'd walk down the street, and Jim was always in the front, walking along, and he'd stop and look in the window at some display and walk on, and Jim and Fred would come along and stop and look in the window and go on. And they used to shop in Shandon because they lived out there. They had this old Jeep. I don't think they had a driver's license. I don't know. They had this old Jeep. So they drove up Shell Creek to Shandon. So they come to the stop sign, and I've told this many times. I'm sure you've all heard it. Stop the stop sign. So, of course, Jim is driving. Fred gets out, walks out in the street, looks up this way, looks down this way, walked back, climbed in the Jeep, says, all clear, took off and ran right into a car. Oh, golly. Then there was Johnny Jesperson. Johnny Jesperson was a drunk, a friendly guy. But everywhere he went was on his horseback. And his horse was a buckskin, was called Buck. Old Buck. And he used
Was that who you named Buck after?
No, I was named Buck after this horse here.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So he would ride Buck everywhere. And he used to live in Shandon. And he would come to Creston when I was just past 21, used to come out to Creston, Kenny, Dick, and I, and we'd have a tip a few in Creston. Well, there was nothing else to do at that time. So anyway, old Johnny Jesper should come with his old horse Buck. Well, old John, he always had his spurs on and everything, little short guy. And he'd get out there talking to old Buck, and then he'd crawl underneath Buck and climb between his hind legs, and flip the tail up, and the old horse just stand there. He'd go in and get a beer and feed part of it to old Buck, and old Buck would grin. So one day, Johnny Jesperson, it was Days of Our Dawns in Santa Margarita or whatever
Oh, yeah.
I think it was Days of the Dawns. So he had come from Shandon, rode his horse, and got to Creston, and he was going to head down to, well, they always made him take he was always spurring the bar stools, when he'd get wild, he'd kick the bar. So anyway, he wanted to ride to the Days of the Dawns parade the next day. So he starts out, well, it's already dark. So old Harold Holsinger his house was south of Creston, Holsinger's cow camp.
Uh-huh.
So he knew Johnny, he says, why don't you spend the night here and get up early tomorrow morning, because it took quite a ways to ride from there to Santa Margarita. Because Harold had a little bunkhouse that he could stay in. So, okay, but he said, now listen, Johnny, you take those spurs off. If you're gonna be sleeping in that bed, you take those spurs off. Okay. So the next morning, he gets up, Harold Holsinger. Well, Johnny had already left because he had to get an early start down there. And later on, somebody was talking to Johnny Jesperson. Johnny Jesperson says, yeah, he said, I never did take my spurs off. But he was a nice guy. He's the only guy I know that got arrested for drunk riding a horse. The cop gave him a ticket for riding his horse drunk. But I think the public outpour was so much that they probably threw the ticket away. That, and then one time a guy named John Bowman lived out in the Carissa Plains, and he was kind of a character. And because Bowman was, well, the last survivors out there, old family. Well, he used to come in, he wouldn't put money in the parking meter. So he got a ticket, and he was supposed to pay the ticket, and he wouldn't. So they were going to put him in jail. So they put him in jail, but everybody was rooting for him, and it made the cops look really, really bad. I think even the city fathers were rooting for him, that somebody paid his fine, so they let him out. But he wasn't going to put any money in the parking. Who's that sound like? Well, that's right. Yesterday we went to get him, and I wouldn't put him. We drove around until he was out there.
Yeah, we were looking around.
Yeah, luckily we were looking for a park because I wasn't going to pay for that.
He was gonna tell them that no, if he got a ticket, he was gonna. Well, Mike Wardlaw told me.
Yeah, because Mike said he never puts money in there. So I was supposed to tell him that, hey, Mike Wardlaw never puts money in there.